So I see the sheriff and I lift off the throttle and look down. We were going 181 miles an hour. I have to preface this whole thing by saying I am not condoning speeding on the road. The stories I'm about to tell you were either in closed road conditions or 1,000 years ago when I was young and dumb. And honestly, and seriously for a second, it was back in my youth, speeding in the 80s, early 90s. Yes, you'd get in trouble, you could go to jail, it was a big deal. But nowadays, if you get pulled over for speeding, let's say you're on the road messing around with somebody and somebody writes down both of your license plates and that person later on, you're done, that person later on gets in an accident and God forbid hurts somebody. And somebody had written your plates down and you get reported as you were street racing with that person, that is potentially, that's homicide, that's involuntary homicide. It's a big deal to race today, so do not do silly things on the road like I'm about to describe. The most recent was in closed road conditions. We're shooting in Manhattan, 5th Avenue. So camera car's there, you drop back a bit, you fly by at 75, 80 miles an hour, what have you. Then we started doing some where I would come from an adjacent street and slide into view and pass camera. But on one of them, we had the road closed and a police officer was at the end of the road with his radar gun out. I'd seen it. Anytime you see a police officer when you have a closed road deal and you see him with his radar gun out, to me, that's a challenge. It's like, oh, this is how it's going to be? All right, then. And here I come onto the street and I'm hammered down, man. I'm getting after it, coming out the camera car. And typically, as soon as you know that you're out of frame, even before the director yells cut, you're off the throttle, slowing down, because what's the point? But this time I stayed on a little bit longer, knowing that the radar gun was out. And sure enough, toward the end of the day, I find the police officer that was there working with us, who actually wasn't that helpful during the shoot, by the way. Although New York City police was generally amazing to work with, NYPD. So he had his gun out, so I went up to him, like, oh, I saw that you had your radar gun and you were shooting a bit. He's like, yeah. And he was like, he knows exactly why I'm asking him. Like, are you really going to make me pull it out of you? I'm like, so what was it? And he goes, it was pretty quick. In fact, it's a speed record. And I'm like, what do you mean a speed record? And he goes, well, the fastest speed we've recorded in Manhattan, which I still to this day think is BS, because 147 miles an hour on 5th Avenue. And I said, that can't be. I mean, I'm Puerto Rican. I know there's a lot of Puerto Ricans, New Yorkers in New York City riding Hayabusas with like turbo Hayabusas that make 1 million horsepower. No, for sure those guys have gone 1 million miles an hour in Manhattan. So he claims that he called it into the precinct. Now I don't know what particular precinct, but anyway, 147 miles an hour on 5th Avenue, New York. Street closed down. I'll take it. My first sponsor in racing was a gentleman who was really good to me. Not only did he help me go racing, but he had a collection of Ferraris at the time that he would just throw me the keys to and I could drive around. An F40, this is in early 90s, an F40, a 512 TR that I got to spend a lot of time in. And I was actually with him in the F40 coming back from Daytona Beach, Florida. He lived in Orlando, we were in Daytona, we're coming back. It's the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm driving and I start getting a little bit sporty, as he called it. And I'm speeding a bit. He turned out, he's like, relax, young man, as he used to call me. So I relaxed a little bit and he starts dozing off. And wide open stretch of I-4 in Central Florida. And I thought, man, I'm not gonna get an opportunity like this. So you can't quietly downshift to 4th in an F40, but I tried to quietly downshift to 4th in F40 and pinned it, and the thing, starts accelerating, then it comes on boost and it starts to pull hard, and I redline 4th and I grab 5th, and I sense movement. I know he's awake, and he kind of leans over. I know he's looking at the speedo. Without any communication, he knows what's up. First 200-mile-an-hour car, I'm trying to peg the speedometer. And we know that those speedometers were massively optimistic. And so I was on it right up until it creeped past 200. And then he's like, that's enough, young man. Slow it down. And I lift off the throttle. So realistically, 201 indicated in F40, 185, 190. But screw that. It said 200. I'm taking it 200 miles an hour on the road. The F40 I'd never be able to keep overnight. So I drive it all day, put it back in his garage and take the 512 TR, which he was okay with me keeping that, right? 22-year-old in a 512 TR, for crying out loud. I just finished giving like all the kids in the neighborhood a ride, their first ride in a 512 TR, pretty cool. One of my friend's wives I'd just given a ride to, and we'd done like 160 something on the road. Again, don't do this at home. I was a dumbass, I shouldn't have done that. Get back and drop her off, and my best friend gets in the car with me, and we're now heading back to his house, we're leaving. And he goes, oh, how fast did you go? I'm like, dude, we just did 160, whatever it was. And that was faster than we had gone, he and I had gone. So he's like, oh, that's bullshit, we gotta go faster than that. So we pull out onto this road in Central Florida called Red Bug Road. Anybody that lives in Central Florida knows Red Bug. Before there were 1,000 neighborhoods to either side. Pull out on a Red Bug and I start grabbing gears. First, second, third, fourth, and I shift up into 5th in this car. And it's that flat 12, 180 degree V12 in Ferraris. It's a freaking flat 12. is screaming. And that sound, to this day, that Carrera GT and Lexus LFA, best sounding cars of all time. Grabbing gears, I'm ripping, what? And I'll never forget this. And my friend Steve, who's in the car with me, is total jackass. I mean, sarcastic son of a bitch and just a jackass. We're flying, no one on the road. I see a car in the distance. It's a 2-lane road with a big median, 2 lanes on the other side, some neighborhoods off to the side. I'm ripping, wah. And I'm like, okay, I'm starting to think about breathing off the throttle because this car's coming up and we're doing 170, 180 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, when the car comes into view enough, on the back of the trunk, sheriff. Let that sink in for a second. Sheriff, Dodge Diplomat. I'll never forget that boxy piece of crap. It's so funny how a lot of thoughts go through your brain in the fraction of a second, right? So I see the sheriff and I lift off the throttle and look down. We were going 181 miles an hour, indicated. And I lift and I went right back to full power. And the thought process later on, I was able to rethink it was like, what? I'm gonna pass him at 150 on the brakes? What is that, right? So right back down, right by, and as we go by, my jackass buddy reaches over, neep, neep, as we fly past the cop. I fly past him. There was a neighborhood called Deer Run that's still there, like a mile and a half down the way, but it just appeared like that, as you would imagine, at 180 miles an hour. And I remember knowing that Deer Run is coming up, and I start braking, and now I'm coming up on cars, and the thing is slowing down, but it's not slowing down like I need it to slow down. And there are 2 cars almost side by side, and you can't make this up, it's like a movie. We go on as hard as we can be braking, on the brakes right between the 2 cars, just barely make the turn into Deer Run. And once you're in Deer Run, there was like a million ways to get out, and we sort of made our way through Deer Run, and I went back, parked the car in my racing sponsor's garage early, the first time I ever showed up early, shut it off, got back in my mom's car, drove my friend home, and drove home the entire time crapping my pants, waiting for the call from John, my sponsor. The police are here, what did you do? And the whole thing blew over. My friend's laughing the whole time. He thought it was the greatest thing ever. I thought it was cool like a year later. But at the time, it was scary as hell. So there are my top speed stories. I'm sure you have some of your own, but those are the ones. Again, don't do this at home. Huge respect for law enforcement. Honestly, I'm not just saying that. And you can't do that kind of stuff. That was when I was young and dumb, and I'm lucky to have gotten away with it.